cloud. Okay, good evening. I suggest that we can start now. Today I will speak about, I think, if we will have time, about 3 mitzvahs that we have today, or at least 2 for sure. One of them is a famous mitzvah, the very first mitzvah that Chazal say that is actually Torah should have been given, and we should have started from Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem. And this is the very first mitzvah that actually should have been given, and is also counted as the first mitzvah normally. And this is the mitzvah of Kidush Hachodesh. The word Kidush Hachodesh is something which is on itself a little bit strange, because normally the mitzvah means, according to the Rambam, it's a mitzvah of creating a calendar, making sure that the calendar is correct, that we have lunar months, and that we have also solar years, so that the year should be a solar year and the month should be a lunar month. But more specifically also that the Yom Tovim should fall in the right season. We know that Pesach is Chag Oviv, and Sukkot is the Tkufas Hashoner, Chag Osif. So the Sukkot has to fall in the time after the summer, and Pesach has to fall in the beginning of the autumn, Chag Oviv, when the Se'orim are actually, the Se'orim are ripe to be cut for the Minchas Omer. So basically, these are the two Yom Tovim, and so to make sure. So the Rambam counts it all as one mitzvah, and he calls it the mitzvah of Kidush Hachodesh. The word Kiddush I would like to discuss today. Where does the word Kiddush come from? In the pasuk that we have in this week's parsha, there is no mentioning at all of the word Kiddush. So we know we have to be koveya. There is an inyan of being koveya, but not the inyan to be Kadesh and saying Mekudesh. The famous Gemara. The Gemara says that when the Bezdin decided to make this day Rosh Chodesh, they came out and they said Mekudesh, and then Klal Yisrael said that we were waiting outside, says Mekudesh. So normally the word Kedusha that exists in the Torah is a word that defines actually an issue. So it is always the word Kedusha is something that related to an issue. All the word that we have in Kedusha is related to an issue. Kedoshim Tiyu, Kedoshim Yu. These are all about the Isurim that we should be aser ourselves, or the Kohanim. When we speak about even Kiddushin that we are doing with a woman, comes also, it's from the opposite of Kedosha, Kedosha B'Yisrael, which means that not to be free and not to be, but to be asset and to be a little bit limited to a husband. So in other words, not to live with any man in the world. It's all about Isurim. Kodshim is about Isurim, not to eat it, the tumah, and to look after that, not to have anoah stam, bichdi, otherwise you have mi'ila. So all the words Kedusha that exist in the world, normally it's all about Isurim. It's about that it's dedicated to a particular use and not for something else. When I'm saying that, there is one exception, which is the Kedushas Hashem. Hashem is also Ato Kodesh, V'Shimcha Kodesh, and indeed there is a problem. Not everybody understands what is the word. How can you define Hashem as being Kodesh? Because Kedusha means that he does not do Averis, and for Hashem it doesn't make sense to be Kedusha. Everything that Hashem does is Kedusha. So what does it mean for Hashem to us to say to Hashem that he is a Kodesh? So this is another discussion. We already discussed that, and there is a Kuzari, etc. So there is a little, but normally the Kedusha is an issue. And there is no Kedusha that we know today that we can say that something goes from a lower level to a high level. It doesn't in the Torah, there is no such a concept. Plus, as I explained to you, there is no words in the Torah that says that the Chodesh is to be Kodesh. And there is, even if we say Mekudesh, there is nothing in the Chodesh that actually refers to an issue. So in Rosh Chodesh, you can do Meluchas. There is nothing that you can do. You have to bring a Musaf in the Beis HaMikdash. But besides that, there is nothing else in the Torah that says that on Rosh Chodesh there is kind of a Kedusha. That you're not allowed to do certain things, Betuma, or you're not allowed to do certain Meluchas, etc. So I would like to speak about that, and maybe to indeed introduce a concept which can explain a little bit how we come to this Kedusha from Kidush Hachodesh. So we know that we have multiple parshas that are describing our Yom Tovim. You have already in the beginning, in Parshas Mishpatim, straight away we come from Mitzrayim, and already, of course, Pesach was given to us already in Parshas Boy. We already discussed that in this week's Parsha. But in the Parshas Mishpatim, there is a mentioning of 3 Yom Tovim, Sholesh Regolim Tuchot Bashono, then he speaks about Chag HaMatzos, and then he speaks about Chag HaKotzir, and then he speaks about Chag HaOsif. So we know already we're going to have 3 Yom Tovim in the year. But then when we come to Emor, then suddenly we have more than 3. We have actually 5 Yom Tovim. We also have in Parshas Emor, when he explains us the whole Yom Tovim, he adds 2 more Yom Tovim, which are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are not mentioned in Mishpatim, and suddenly when it comes to Parshas Emor, we have 5 Yom Tovim. And when we come to Parshas Pinchas, which are all the Musafim, suddenly we have a 6th day that we have to bring a Musaf, and that is the day of Rosh Chodesh. On Rosh Chodesh, it says also, of Rosh Chodeshechem, Takiv Oil Hashem. So you have to bring a special Musafim, that you have to bring 2 Porim, 1 Ayin, and 7 Kvosim. So it's a typical Musaf that you bring in normal Yom Tovim like Pesach. You also bring the same Musaf. So we see here suddenly, so we start off with 3, then it becomes 5, and from the 5 it becomes 6. Now, when we look on all those 3 different parshas, or at least those 2 parshas between Emor and Pinchas, there is something very interesting. It's not very symmetrical. By this I mean, when we speak about in Emor, you will find the Melocha, Isur Melocha of Shabbos. It mentions Shabbos as well, but it does not mention the Musaf. So in Emor, there is no mentioning that you have to bring Ishel Hashem on Shabbos. There is nothing, no korbanos have to be brought on Shabbos. But in Parshas Pinchas, he mentions the Musaf, but on the other hand, he does not mention that there is a love of an Isur Melucha. When it comes to Rosh Chodesh, nothing is mentioned in Emor. Emor does not exist. In Emor, Parshas Emor, we don't know anything about the Rosh Chodesh. But when it comes to Parshas Pinchas, there he mentions the Musaf, but he does not mention Isur Melucha on Rosh Chodesh. So there is no Isur Melucha, nowhere in the Torah written, particularly, that actually refers to an Isur Melucha on Rosh Chodesh, but there is a Musaf, and this is how we know it today. When it comes to Pesach, then both in Emor and in Pinchas, he mentions Isur Melucha and a Musaf, and he also mentions Isur Melucha in Pinchas, and also he explains which is the Musaf that you have to bring. And by Shavuos, there is also an exception. There is a Melocha, yes, there is an Isur Melucha in Shavuos, but when the Musaf is not mentioned, the Musaf from Shavuos, he only mentions the Shtia Lechem, but not the Musaf of Shavuos. But in Pinchas, he mentions the Musaf of Shavuos. So you see here, there is what we can call dissymmetry. It's not symmetrical. So what you find in one, you don't find in the other, and then you have a bit of an issue. So if somebody would have found the Gemara, and the Gemara would have said, I'm speaking theoretically, that on Rosh Chodesh there is also an Isur Melucha, I would understand. I would understand that somebody would say that we learn from Binyan Av, since Rosh Chodesh is mentioned in Pinchas as bringing a Musaf, and it's mentioned between Shabbos and Pesach, and since Shabbos is the Isur Melucha and Pesach is Isur Melucha, so it makes sense to say that Rosh Chodesh should also be an Isur Melucha. Why doesn't it say that there is Isur Melucha? Because Shabbos is also not mentioned the Isur Melucha in Pinchas. So we can learn like a Binyan Av, that like on Rosh Chodesh, like on Shabbos and on Pesach, there is an Isur Melucha. So also on Rosh Chodesh, there would be an Isur Melucha. And the reason why it's not mentioned is because you would understand by itself. And in Emor, it's not mentioned at all for some reason that we don't know. There's other things that are not mentioned. Anyway, it's not symmetrical. So since it is not 100% symmetrical, one could believe and understand that there is Isur Melucha that one has to do on Rosh Chodesh, although it's not mentioned, but it's sometimes the Torah writes something on one din and writes something else on another one, and is not mentioning that this one is also chal on that one, and this one is chal on that one, but the Chazal tell us clearly that it is, like by the Se'ez and by the Baheres, by Metzoire, a lot of times. So we have we find that, for example, There are certain things. The white hair is a simon of tumah, and also the growing is a simon of tumah, and therefore, which one is mentioned only by Baheres, the other one is only mentioned by Se'ez. But Chazal say that both are valid on the other one. So the fact that it's not mentioned is not a proof that there isn't any related. A lot of times Chazal learn a new issue by doing Ksir Shova, Binyanav. I can give you a lot of other examples where we are seeing this. So I wouldn't have been surprised to see that there is a Tana that holds on Rosh Chodesh is Isur Melucha. We could actually say, because if somebody learned in Maseches Megillah and Maseches Rosh Hashanah, and that there is such a concept of an Isur Melucha in Rosh Chodesh. So there is the Gemara in Megillah and the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah nearly explicitly say that there is an Isur Melucha in Rosh Chodesh, and nobody understands actually where this Isur Melucha comes from. And so Rashi is saying maybe kind of a minig, it's not clear. Tosfos says clearly that there is Isur Melucha, and then he says that it's the Regilim Loimar, that the Isur Melucha remained, that actually it's a minig, but it's remained by the women. So there is clearly in the early sources an Isur Melucha of in Rosh Chodesh, but this Isur Melucha suddenly disappeared. So I would like to introduce you something new, and that you can understand a little bit a lot of the Gemaras that later on when you will learn the Gemaras that you'll understand. My point I want to make is that you had two schools in Klal Yisrael. You had two periods in Klal Yisrael. You had a period in Klal Yisrael where there was an Isur Melucha in Rosh Chodesh, and then you had a period when there is no Isur Melucha in Rosh Chodesh. And the new Sanhedrin that decided not to have an Isur Melucha. The reason why I introduce you is not only because of this little Gemaras that actually mention that there is an Isur Melucha in Rosh Chodesh, but also a lot of the problems of that we see the Kidush Hachodesh on itself. We see sometimes that the Kidush Hachodesh in the Gemara seems that it is the Kiddush of the Rosh Chodesh, and sometimes we see that the Kidush Hachodesh does not mean that we mekadesh the Rosh Chodesh, but we mekadesh the whole Chodesh. We mekadesh the month. The month receives the Kedusha that we are telling. When we say Mekudash, we actually mean the month as the Kedusha. And we see that there is a balagan. Sometimes the Gemara mentions yes, and then the Gemara mentions not, and we don't know. It's like a big balagan in the Chazal and in the Rishonim, and even the Rambam has it very difficult because the Rambam explicitly say indeed that the Kidush Hachodesh goes for each and every month. And so I would like to introduce you that there were two schools, and we'll see how we learn it. It says in Parshas Emor. Actually, I will go to the next slide. Is maybe more better. I don't know if you can see. So we see in Parshas Emor, the pasuk says, "Eile moyade Hashem mikroe kodesh asher tiikru oisom b'moyado." So this pasuk is a few times repeated in Parshas Emor, two times in the beginning and one time at the end. Kind of when he makes a summary, it uses merely the same. And so the question is, in Emor is no mentioning of Rosh Chodesh, and so. The question is, how do you read that? So when he says Eile Moed Hashem Mikroe Kodesh, so Chazal learn Mikroe Kodesh that you have to say loud that this month, this Rosh Chodesh, this Chodesh is Kodesh. So although it starts with Eile Moed Hashem Mikroe Kodesh, the Gemara learns that from here we have the mitzvah of Kidush Hachodesh, and we don't understand. I mean, it's difficult to understand because in Parshas Emor there is no mentioning at all of Rosh Chodesh. There's mentioned Eile Moyade Hashem. Moyadim are Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, eventually Yom Kippur if you want, and then you have Sukkot. So these are the Moyadim, and the Gemara learns Mikroe Kodesh that you have to say Mekudesh, and even you have to say Mekudesh twice. Mekudesh. Why? Because it says Mikroe Kodesh in Loshen Rabim. And then the Gemara learns Asher Tikru Oisom is Asher Tikru Atem. So you have to read them out. So even Atem Afilu Shoigim Atem Afilu Mezidim. That if a Bezin creates a Rosh Chodesh on the wrong day, or they are Me'abed Shon on the wrong year, then it's nothing. It's kosher. the year is Uber, and the Rosh Chodesh has been is a kosher Rosh Chodesh, is a proper Rosh Chodesh, even though they made a mistake, even if they made a mistake on a mezid. They did it on purpose, they wanted to force something. So we learn here this posuk in Emor, all about Kidush Hachodesh, Mikroe Kodesh. You have to say it loud that it's Kodesh. It's clear that this posuk is not referring to Rosh Chodesh. This posuk is referring to the Moyadim, to the Yom Tovim. So what I wanted to say is there are actually two schools. You have on left hand, you have where the Rosh Chodesh is not a Moyed, which is what we do today. So we know today that Rosh Chodesh is not a Moyed, and you're allowed to do Meluchas on Rosh Chodesh. And so the Kiddush of the Chodesh is for the sake of the Moyadim. So why do we Mekadesh when we say Mikroe Kodesh? It means only on the two Rosh Chodesh Nisan and Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. On those two Rosh Chodesh, there is a chiyuv to be Mekadesh. Why? Because this Kedusha will create the Kedushas Yom Tov. The only Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot and Pesach will only become real, will only become the Reise if the Bezdin were Mekadesh Dem Chodesh. So the Kedusha from the Rosh Chodesh is not to be Mekadesh the Rosh Chodesh, but it is to be Mekadesh Dem Chodesh, the month. The month of Nisan becomes the Kedusha, and only if the Bezdin were Mekadesh the month of Nisan, then the Pesach will be a Pesach. If the Bezdin are not Mekadesh the Chodesh, then the Pesach is not a Pesach. And the Ritvo, we already spoke about it, the Ritvo in Chulin Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis refers to a case where Klal Yisrael did not have a Yom Kippur. How did they not have a Yom Kippur? So the Ritvo that because the Bezdin did not Mekadesh that month, they explicitly, because of problems, there were problems in Zeres HaMelech, so they had problems. So what they did is the Bezdin explicitly did not Mekadesh the month. And as the Rebbe Povarsky explained, that what they did is they said that the 30th should be Rosh Chodesh, and they did not be Mekadesh. They only were Kovea, the first one to be, the 30th to be the first day of the month, but they did not make a Kiddush, they did not make a Kiddush Hachodesh. And since they did not make the Kiddush Hachodesh, then the Yom Kippur was not a Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah was not a Rosh Hashanah, and the Sukkot will not be a Sukkot, because it depends on the Kiddush. So the Kidush Hachodesh, the explanation, the taich is literally to be Mekadesh the whole Chodesh. And this is only valid for Tishri and Nisan, because it's the only 2 months where there is a Moyed in there. So it's lav dafka on the mitzvah of the month. It's not a din in the month, but it is in the Rosh Chodesh, but it's a mitzvah, it's a chelik of the mitzvah of the Yom Tovim. On the other hand, we see from the Gemara, from the Limudim that we see, is that somehow it is Rosh Chodesh seems to be a Moyed, because Eile Moyad Hashem, Mikroe Kodesh refers to the Eile Moyad Hashem. So it seems that Rosh Chodesh was considered by those Limudim as a Moyed. And so the Rosh Chodesh, as it is a Moyed, it's a Mikroe Kodesh. Mikroe Kodesh is Isur Melocha. The Rambam learns that how do we know that there is an assay for not doing a melocha? The Gemara says always that Yom Tov is ein esed doiche lois aseh v'aseh, that you have both the lois aseh, this is clear, but where is the assay? So the Rambam says it's from the word Mikroe Kodesh. By each Yom Tov you will find in parshas Emor, it continuously says Mikroe Kodesh by Pesach, Mikroe Kodesh by Shavuos, Mikroe Kodesh by I think by Rosh Hashanah, by Yom Kippur, and also by Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. So it continues says Mikroe Kodesh. So the word Mikroe Kodesh means you have to call it Kedusha. Kedusha meaning an Isur Melocha. And so we see explicitly that there is such an expression, Mikroe Kodesh, also in Rosh Chodesh. So the Kiddush was not the Kiddush for the month, but it was a Kiddush of the day of the Rosh Chodesh. And this was an Isur Melocha. And there was an Isur Melocha, and Isur D'Oraisa of not making Melucha on Rosh Chodesh. And as we see in the Mefurish and the Novi says the Maaseh, that the Yom HaMaaseh, that this is today is the Yom HaMaaseh, not Rosh Chodesh, as Rashi brings down, where it's explicitly, according to in the time of the Nevi'im, Rosh Chodesh was clearly a day of an Isur Melucha, and not a day of like a normal day. And so there we can understand that each month they required a Kidush Hachodesh. And each 12 or 13 times a year, we had to make a Kidush Hachodesh. And so in the time of the early Nevi'im, so each month we did a Kidush Hachodesh. And it was called Mikroe Kodesh, and therefore there was an Isur Melucha on Rosh Chodesh. But after the time of the Nevi'im, in the time of Chazal, somehow the Sanhedrin changed, and they decided that Rosh Chodesh is not going to be an Isur Melucha, since it's not mentioned, not in Emer and not in Pinchos. And so the only reason why we're making a Kiddush HaChodesh was for Torah is to be Mekadosh the Chodesh of Nisan and Mekadosh the Chodesh of Tishri. And the shot I want to introduce you is that in our Mishnahs and the Gemara, it's always a mix of those two periods. So there are some remnants of the old Minogim that we still do a Kiddush HaChodesh each month, although there is no reason to do it, because the whole Kiddush Hachodesh would only be relevant for Nisan and Tishri, but for the other months, for Iyar, Sivan, there is no reason why to do it, because there is no Yom Tov that is explicitly depending on the Rosh Chodesh. And but what remained is the minhag of Isur Melucha. It's only a minhag of not making Melucha. You can check up in the Biur Halacha about how today if there is still this minhag. And also, we are still making a Kiddush HaChodesh, although the Rambam says if somebody did not make Kiddush HaChodesh, not me'akev, but the Lekatchila is a kind of, we do a Kiddush HaChodesh. But the only one that we really have to do is the Rosh Chodesh Nisan and Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. And indeed, from this we can see the Gemara says explicitly that the only 2 months that the Eidim are allowed to be Mechal Shabbos is for Nisan and for Tishrei. So the Eidim is allowed to be Mechal Shabbos because we have to be Mekadosh that Chodesh. And since this is the Moyadim, this is a Moyed, so you're allowed to still those 2 months are still to that you have to that you have to be Mekadosh it because of the 2 Moyadim that are within these 2 months. And so you see this. My Chiddush I want to say today is that what we have today is a kind of a mix of 2 different opinions that existed in time, and we have still remnants of an old one, and the complication starts because there is a bit of a mix of 2 different periods and Mamori Chazal, which do not fit always with each other because they're coming from 2 different schools, and therefore you will see that a lot of things will be answered and will be clearer in the Gemaras and in the Braises. And a lot of questions that the Minchas Chinuch and all the other Meforshim, that they have a question, and even the Rambam, which had a lot of difficulties in combining all those Ma'amar Chazal, can be explained with this theory that I just explained right now. The next point I wanted to do is, and we will finish in literally in 5 minutes, is there is, as parshas Boy came along, you always receive these nice documents that people send out, like Torah, Divrei Torah, and this is one that I received from somebody who wrote a whole explanation. And one of his texts that he explains is that Hillel system is used till today to calculate the Hebrew calendar. This calculation is result in a precise calendar, which has not and will not need any modifications until the end of time. So as you can imagine, my blood pressure goes up a little bit when I read those things. It's not fair for me to be like that, but this is typically what it creates because it's clearly wrong. And people sometimes are saying things without actually giving it a little bit in a conditional format. Would not, should not, but not to be very clear, explicit like that. It's clearly wrong. As we already discussed that Pesach every 200 years moves up 1 day. So on average, our calendar is wrong with nearly 7 minutes per year. And that means that each 200 years about, it will be 1 day that it will move up. And since Pesach has to fall between the 21st of March and the 20th of April, as the Kusari says that it has to fall in the Mazel Tle, and therefore it's clearly that if we see already today, I think that this year Pesach falls on the 17th of April, so it's already quite close to the border. In other words, in other words, here in 1,000 years, it is very possible that Pesach will fall outside of the Mazel Tle, will fall after the 20th of April, and 1,500 years ago, that Pesach fell before the 21st of March. And I've made the calculations and it's correct. It will definitely have fallen before the 21st of March for some years. And as I explained you, this is the reason why the Christians, they actually separated from our calendar, because they saw that the calendar was not correct. But according to Rav Sherki, it's possible that he wants to answer that 800 years ago, this calendar did not exist yet. So basically, he says that there is proof, he says astronomical proof, that our calendar only exists 800 years ago, which maybe because of that problem. I don't know yet why he says that. I have to send them an email, but it seems that it's possible because of that issue, because otherwise Pesach would have fallen on the 21st of March. So our calendar that we have was started off by Hillel, by Rabbi Hillel, but it did not finalize till very late. We know already from, they found in the Genozim from Cairo, they found letters where they discovered a machlokes between Rab Sadigon and Rabbi Aaron ben Meir, and who was a Nossi in Eretz Yisrael, and Rab Sadigon, who was a Nossi, he was an Aluf in Bovel, and they both were quite fighting with each other on the calendar. There is a certain dichui that Rabbi Aaron ben Meir wanted to introduce, and at some point for 2 years, Klal Yisrael had 2 different calendars. So for 2 years, Klal Yisrael ate matzahs on different days in the year, which was a big tragedy for Klal Yisrael, because the Karoim, they laughed at us, they made fun of the whole Klal Yisrael, and it became a piluk, a terrible piluk, because according to one, the other one ate chometz kores, chiyuv kores, or you could maybe say that it's not like that, the Beis Din can decide, but this is already a different pilpul that one can do according to the Rambam. But in any case, after 2 years, they reunited, and the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael gave up, and the one from Rab Sadigon, this is our calendar that we have today. That's how it is. But others say that its calendar moved away. But it's clear that in 1,000 years, if according to Rab Sadigon, we will still use that calendar, we will, even Mashiach will have to change it, because we will come to Pesach being after the 20th of April. I will finish here because I am out of time. Are there any questions? Okay, so I will just repeat. So the Kidush Hachodesh, we explained, is 2 ways to understand Kidush Hachodesh. Either is to be Kaddish the Chodesh, the month of Tishri and Nisan. This is only valid and makes sense only for Nisan and Tishri. Then the Kidush Hachodesh is the Chodesh. And the other explanation is the Kidush Hachodesh means the Kidush of the Rosh Chodesh. The word Chodesh, a lot of times Chazal explain us, the word Chodesh means Rosh Chodesh. We see it a lot also in Novi, that when it says Chodesh Shayom, Chodesh Mocha, Mocha Chodesh, meaning tomorrow is the Rosh Chodesh. And so the Kiddush to be Mekadosh, the Rosh Chodesh, with probably an Isur Melocha, since there is Musaf. And so there was a time when there was an Isur Melocha. And what we have today is still a remnant of this time. A certain minhagings remained, like Isur Melocha, and eventually also the fact that we are Mekadosh, the Chodesh, every 12 months, that remains still. And but the real Kiddush is only on Nisan and on Tishri, as the Ritva explains. If we don't make a Kiddush on those 2 months, then the Yom Tovim are not Yom Tovim. There is no Yom Kippur, there is no Sukkot, because it requires a Kiddush Hachodesh. The Ritva, it's a Kiddush from the Ritva, he explains like that, the Gemara in Chulin. And then we explained also, the next part was that our calendar is a very nice calendar, but it's definitely not bulletproof, and it's not future-proof, that it will require some adaptation in probably about 1,000 years, because the Pesach will start to get to after the 20th of April, which on itself can be a problem if you absolutely want the Pesach to fall in what we call the Mazel Tle. As I explained already in the previous year, the mazel tle is not astronomical mazel tle, because this is already long too late, but it is a mazel tle that is more astrological. That's what the Rambam maybe calls the Galgal, the ninth Dachi. This is the ninth Galgal, which we cannot see, but it's there somewhere and it does not move. And this is what I understood from the Rambam means between the 21st of March and 20th of April, which is the mazel of the tle. So we will have to move it eventually anyway. And maybe Taka be zoiche to Mashiach, and that we should, according to the Rambam, go back to the calendar by the Re'ir, and according to the Reb Sadi going, we will continue with the calendar that we have today, but may Mashiach help us in understanding how we will solve the problem of this movement, this little inaccuracy to our calendar versus the real tropical year, and that he will explain us how we will do it, and maybe we will just do it in the ways that have been suggested by some of the Rabbonim or what you can say scholars, Jewish scholars, on how to adapt our calendar today so that these errors should not exist anymore. If there is no more question.
Hello, just a small remark. If it's possible next week to start later at 7:30, because the Daf Yomi finishes later.
Okay. Okay, so next week later.
Today we just finished at 7, so it means that next week will be a bit later. So if 7:30 is okay for everyone.
No, for me then it has to be much later. So because I have a shir myself from 7:45 till 8:30.
Okay, so we leave it. Then I'll catch on the recording.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Bye, Kol Tov.